Sometimes one of the hardest questions you can be asked is who is your favorite actor of all time? There's a lot of them that get thrown around like Marlon Brando, Robert Downey Jr., Robin Williams, Brampton St. Rumterfrabble. But when I'm asked this question, it usually takes me about half a second to think before I reply with John Candy. A lot of you younger kids will probably say, who's John Candy and why is he so enormous? Well, I'm sure the enormous part is none of our business, but his size was not the only thing about him that was massive. There was also his acting talent. John Candy was one of a kind. We lost him way too soon. He died while making the film Wagons East in 1994, 4 years before I was born. And no one has been able to replicate him since. He's often imitated, but never duplicated. Something you probably don't know is that my family loves the John Hughes movies. Specifically 3 of them: National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and Uncle Buck. 2 of these happen to star John Candy. And upon seeing those films and quoting them endlessly with my dad, I became inspired to see more of John Candy's filmography. And ever since that day when I began that in 8th grade, John Candy has been my #1 favorite actor. But why? What makes him so good? Well, that's what this video is about now, isn't it? This is John Candy, an acting legend. First things first, what kinds of roles did John Candy take when he was alive? Well, they were all kind of the same, quirky oddballs that said weird things and were high-spirited. But even though they were all fairly similar characters, he never played them the same. Partially because of the scripts, too. A lot of the roles, like say Del Griffith, were tailor-made for him because of how weird he was and how he could pull them off. But John Candy was so versatile in his skills that he could set this role apart from, say, Buck from Uncle Buck. I mean, really, when you get down to it, they're fairly similar characters. They're quirky, they're odd, they're socially awkward, they have no real prospects in life. But John Candy is able to play them entirely differently. Buck is kind of a lazy do-nothing who knows nothing about the world but somehow has some decent social skills, albeit with sometimes not the best morals. He's like what you'd get if you crossed a 1950s stereotypical dad with a lazy welfare leech. He's sleazy, but he has a good heart, and that shows in his demeanor. Meanwhile, Del Griffith is basically that one guy, you know the kind. He's the guy that just can't take a hint. You try to tell him, hey, I'm not interested in hanging out with you, or you're kind of bothering me, and he does not get it. He's always upbeat and cheery. Even when he's angry, he still has somewhat of a positive spin on it. Truly a kindly Midwestern man who just happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and meets the wrong people. Although sometimes, the exact right people in the wrong situations. Once again, you can't just attribute this to the writing because John Candy plays them differently. He gives Del Griffith and Uncle Buck different mannerisms, speaking patterns, or inflections. Though their comedy feels very similar and they talk the same way, heck, they even look the same, they feel like different people. If you put them next to each other, yeah, they'd look the same and you'd probably wonder, hey, why is there like some kind of parallel universe version of the other guy standing here, or are they twins or something? But they don't feel like the same person. And that goes for all of his movies too, like Chet in The Great Outdoors or What's-His-Name in Summer Rental. Whenever Candy was given a different role, he went above and beyond to distinguish them. I mean, let's be real. His voice, his appearance, the way he moves, all of this is very recognizable. So when someone has these specific quirks and distinctions that set them apart from everyone else, and they fit so well into a role that you forget it's them, they're doing a great job, and Candy does that every single time. He's also surprisingly versatile. One of the things he was most known for was being on SCTV, which was basically the Canadian version of Saturday Night Live. Uncle Buck, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and his little brief appearances in Home Alone and Little Shop of Horrors cemented him as a comedic actor, right? Of course. He was a comedian first and foremost, and he did these roles exceptionally well. But there were also some parts that weren't humor-based. Cool Runnings is a bit mixed. His character does have some humorous moments, of course, but he's not really the funny guy, so to speak. Yes, the character's cliched where it's the washed-up old guy who ruined his chances in the big leagues and now he has to come around and coach these teams of, oh, they're not gonna win, but oh, they can, they're the underdogs and he's gonna help them. Not exactly the most unique character around, but Candy's able to pull it off. Once again, this is not a role that's really deep into comedy. There's a lot of serious aspects to it, like when it's revealed that he cheated. Candy delivers a very strong emotional performance here, and it's one of the highlights of the movie, a movie which, I will be honest, I'm not super big on. Even in other bombs like JFK, his role there was pretty convincing too. Candy wasn't just a comedic actor, though he kept getting comedic roles in comedic movies. He also had the ability to have a serious side to him, a serious side which, sadly, we didn't get to see all too much of. Maybe if he lived longer than 1994, he would have started taking some serious roles. But for the ones we got, I think they're pretty good. Although I must admit, it is pretty hard to hear his voice without hearing some kind of snappy remark. Speaking of snappy remarks, there's John Candy's style of humor. Now, comedians are always set apart by not just their material, but how they deliver the material. They can be subdued and quiet or loud and bombastic. John Candy just feels like an everyman. When he told jokes, he could be subtle, he could be loud and bombastic, but for the most part, it just felt like somebody you knew. One of your friends that you just so happen to be hanging around at that time and he cracks a joke. The loud stuff is always fun, the subdued stuff is fun, but above all, his style of humor is not too obvious. For example, in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, a lot of the stuff that Del Griffith says isn't, "Hey, joke!" It's, "Hey, joke, I'm throwing it into the conversation, just a joke. A little bit of a joke here. Joke. Like that. You can pick up on the jokes, you can laugh at them, but they don't stop everything just to make a point of, oh, look at him, he's being wacky, he's being goofy. Rarely, if ever, did John Candy have that done to him. Even in other more obvious and loud films like Wagons East, they didn't do that. They let his dialogue carry the film. They knew how to write a character around his strengths, being that he could just throw a joke into a conversation, not draw too much attention to it, and then you laugh and then go, hey, I'm glad it treated me with some respect by not bashing me over the head with the material until it loses all of its humor. By the way, this is not a I might, but this is an I will here. I will review Wagons East someday. I absolutely promise you. I think people are too negative on this film. I'll touch upon that in another video and at the end of this one. But perhaps the biggest thing that set John Candy apart was his personality. On set, off set, in between, John Candy was just a lovable, fun, happy guy. Wherever you went with this guy, wherever you saw him, he was always smiling and being eager to meet people, and he just seemed like a real genuine person. Of course, I never met him, he died 4 years before I was born, but hey, if he was still around today, I would have no qualms meeting him. Like everyone with this kind of personality, it translates to his films. Every single one he's in, whether it's a good one, a bad one, whether he has a big part or a small part, he treats it like it's the best thing ever. His big break, the one that it's gonna finally make him make it in the industry. Of course, for most of these, he's already made it in the industry, but it feels like he's just constantly trying to break in because he's having so much fun. I've never seen him go halfway on a performance. All of them, it's above and beyond. Let's take a look at some examples outside of his really popular good ones. Summer Rental is okay. It's not fantastic like, say, Uncle Buck or The Great Outdoors, but it's not bad either. It's just a little by the numbers. It shows that this was pretty early on in his film career. I will say, if John Candy was not cast as the lead in this film, it would probably be boring, forgettable, and not worth anyone's time. But all of the scenes with him have such energy and drive and passion put into it that you kind of get swept up along for the ride even if the material isn't really good per se. When an actor has fun, you have fun. Batman and Robin is not a very good film, but Arnold Schwarzenegger is having such a good time that you kind of have fun along with him. Secret of Nim 2 is a pile of garbage, but Eric Idle is clearly having a blast and it's hard not to have a blast right alongside him. And when a character like that is your main character making the most out of a pretty mediocre script, you kinda look at it a bit better. John Candy's saying these relatively okay to passable jokes, but with his energy and delivery, they're actually funny. Take a look at the scene where his cooler leaks and he's spilling it all over people on the beach. The reactions of all the people are definitely the best parts, but it's made all the better when John Candy has his little ad-libbed quips in there, like saying, oh, well, it's a good thing you didn't have a fire on a beach, that's illegal, I think. Stuff like that. And again, they don't draw too much attention to it, they just let it pass. Or Canadian Bacon. I don't like Michael Moore. I can understand some of the things he says. Some of the things he fights for are pretty good, but I think he's a bit arrogant, I think he's a bit loud, and I think he's quite rude. And also, he bashes people over the head with his opinions. Nowhere is this more obvious than in his comedy film, Canadian Bacon. This is not a very good film, at all. This is definitely a guilty pleasure for me because it's not a good film, and I really want to like it, but it's so heavy-handed in its social commentary that it just bogs down the film. The only reason it's any good is because John Candy is able to make good with the premise. The premise is that some conspiracy nuts who live on the border of the United States and Canada believe that Canada is going to start a full-fledged war with America. So, they, with no experience or really know how to do anything, break into Canada to single-handedly try to take it down. There's some pretty good jokes in there, but again, it gets bogged down by the quote-unquote message. John Candy, though, he makes the scenes. Every time he's on there, he's giving it his all, he's having a blast, and he's improving on the script. A lot of people take actors for granted. A lot of times people will say it's just the bad writing that's ruining things. But no, actors help pull together scripts and stories, and John Candy was able to do that for even the worst of films, as we can see here. Whether they were good or bad, John Candy was always the light in each production. And it's sad to say that he went away. How did he die? Well, as the films went on, you can kind of see he got bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, no disrespect to overweight people, but that is an obvious fact that it's not very healthy to be like that, and John Candy was no exception to that. Halfway through filming Wagons East, John Candy died of a heart attack. On set, in his trailer. Because of this, they kinda had to shamble the film together and put in some scenes with the stunt doubles and cut some important parts out, and yeah, that kinda shows in the final product, but again, more on that some other day. And we all lost a great talent that day. Both of the final films he was in, Canadian Bacon, which was the last one released, and Wagons East, which was the last one produced, were both dedicated to John Candy's honor. Never again would he grace the silver screen. And that's a real shame. He was 1 in a million. If that. I don't think there will ever be someone quite like John Candy. He went above and beyond every time, had a great personality, wonderful delivery, and above all, was really dedicated to just make people happy. John Candy, we miss you, and you truly are an acting legend. Well folks, thank you very much for watching the video. What did you guys think of John Candy? What's your favorite John Candy film? And what do you think about Wagons East? Because, again, that's gonna happen someday. Comment below and let me know because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. May John Candy rest in peace, and I'll see you guys next week.